Well, today we're coming to you from beautiful Prince William Sound here on a gorgeous sunny Alaskan day. What are we doing today? Well, look at the Tamron 150-500. It's a new offering from Tamron for the Nikon Z body. What we want to know is how good is this for wildlife photography? Is that price point, the savings on this guy, worth it instead of buying a native lens? And that's what we're going to look at. We've got this lens for about a week, so let's get out here and test it, see how well it does. So let's talk about it. I'll tell you what a great day to be alive. This is a beautiful, beautiful day here. Just gorgeous. Actually, really harsh conditions to shoot in, but just beautiful nonetheless. So yeah, this 150-500 lens here, that's what we're reviewing today. I'm going to actually set it down for a second. I want to start off by saying a big thank you to Stewart's Photography for being able to get this rental for me, and that's a big, big help here in Alaska. Stewart's, if you don't know, has a great camera shop here in Alaska. So if you do come to Anchorage, you're going to Alaska, swing by, say hi to the guys, Bill and Brian, to the shop, and pick you up a rental. They have tons of rentals, Sony, Canon, all kinds of stuff out there, Nikon, you name it, they've got it. And they've got a great selection of stuff to buy. And also it's tax-free here in Alaska, so if you buy something, save yourself a lot of money by not having any taxes on what you buy. Just awesome. So stop by and see them. And again, big thank you to those guys. All right, so back to the Tamron lens. This lens has some really, really interesting features. I've had it for about 6 days now. I got another day with it before I take it back. So it's been a really fun lens to use, and sometimes a little bit aggravating. We'll go through some of those things, what I really like about the lens and things I don't like about the lens. But overall, it's been a pretty good experience. So to start with, this is a telescoping lens, which means basically that it creeps out. So you extend it out here, which is really nice when you need to pack it and travel with it. But the only problem with that is, and it happens with all telescoping lenses, you have a chance to get moisture and dust inside the lens. Now, I've really never had one myself have that happen, but I've had other people that's had it happen to them. That's the only drawback to telescoping lens right there. The next issue with the telescoping lens is how the weight distributes. So this is a heavier lens. This lens runs about 4.1 pounds total. When you're on a gimbal and you've got it collapsed and you get it balanced and then you extend it, it's going to nosedive. Or vice versa, if you have it all the way extended and you got it balanced extended and you collapse it, it's going to go the other way. So when it's collapsed completely, the stored length on this guy is a little over 8.5 inches, which is really, really nice. Extended, it's probably around 12 inches or so. When it's fully extended, probably 11 inches. So it really makes it nice, again, like I said, for packing and traveling, a lot better that way. Now, with this weight, like I said, it's 4.1 pounds with the collar attached. Take the collar off, I think it's 3.8 pounds, somewhere in there, but I always have the collar on it. Now this lens is lighter than the 180-600. So this one comes in at 4.1, the 180-600 comes at 4.5. But this lens, for some reason, feels heavier, especially on the Z9, because the Z9 is a heavy body. And I think that's because most of the weight is back here closer to the body when it's in its collapsed state. So it just feels like all the weight is right here at the body. Now that makes it nice for when you're shooting this way. Just when you extend it, you do feel the weight that comes out of this lens element here. You can even feel it in your hand kind of when it dip. But most of the weight is more compact back here when it's collapsed. I think that's why it feels heavier. It's not heavier, but it feels that way. And as far as the handling of this lens when you're telescoping it out, it is a little tight on the zoom, but that's not bad, because that means basically you have no lens creep. And this is the first of the two features I want to talk about that are really innovative in this lens. First is you have a lock switch when it's collapsed right here, so now it won't zoom at all. And a lot of lenses do already have this lock here already. Canon goes with a kind of a tightener. Some other lenses like Nikon, some others sometimes have a lock here. The second part of this is really cool, is as you extend it, you can actually slide the zoom barrel forward and it locks the whole lens. Now, what is the drawback of that? Well, this thing's really easy to move. So as you're working with this thing, when you're trying to move yourself around, you're crawling on the ground and you're wanting to move yourself you may lock this thing or unlock this thing, and either you're running your zoom when you don't mean to, or it's just unwieldy when that thing's moving all the time. It's just kind of, or when you're shooting birds in flight, same thing. You'll hit that lock there, so it's kind of annoying a little bit, but it is a nice feature to lock your, at 500 you lock it's going to stay, but that does drive me nuts, especially when I'm crawling around the ground and trying to move around. This thing was just driving me a little bit nutty, but I do like the lock feature. It's pretty cool. So let's get on to the controls of this lens. Let's start with the first control in here, and that is your three-way selector for what you want your focal range to be. So you have your full range, goes from where you're at to infinity. You've got a moderate range up to 10 meters from you. Then you got 10 meters to infinity. So what is that for? Well, let's say you're at the 10 meters to infinity. That basically means if your animal or your subject is 10 meters away from you or farther, it's like say it's 15 meters from you. Then if you put this on 10 meters to infinity, it's going to find that subject faster than you do full because it has less range to switch through. If you have it in the full, it's going to search the whole thing. You've got it on the other two, it's going to search within those ranges, so it's supposed to make the focus be a little faster. I always leave it in full for myself. The next thing you have on here, you have autofocus and manual focus. You need to switch between the two. And with that being said, there is a manual focus ring right here. It's the first ring you get to. Then your last switch on here is the nonlinear and linear. This is with the focus ring. So if you want a different type of manual focus, the linear manual focus or nonlinear manual focus, that's where you switch that. I personally don't use manual focus on this lens unless I need to correct something, and it's usually just a quick throw just to move the focus out of the way so I can get better focus. The last thing on here is going to be your zoom ring up here in the front. That's it. Again, I said like before, that thing locks, not a big deal. There is no control ring on this. You just have the manual focus and the zoom ring. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the lens collar. This is the second really neat feature. This has a Arca Swiss foot on it, which is really cool. Come on, Canon and Nikon, get us Arca Swiss feet on our lenses. That's really nice to have. This one is a little bit short, so if I own this lens, I would replace this foot if I could with a longer foot. The reason is you don't have a whole lot of room to move this back and forth as far as your... The only problem I have with this foot is it's really narrow between here on this, and it's really bad between the grip on a Z9 and that foot. It's hard to get can't get your hand in there, at least I can't. The one thing I did not like about this lens that drove me up the wall was the lens hood. This lens hood comes off way too easy. It needs to have like all the other lenses we have with Canon and Nikon where they have a tab on here that locks it and stays locked. This guy popped off constantly. I was constantly noticing that the lens hood was off. I had to look around and find the lens hood, so it was really, really bad. I had the same problem with the Canon 200-800, but once they put the sleeve on and all that stuff, it seemed to fix that problem. But this one right now pops off constantly, drives me up the wall with this lens hood. So there needs to be a way to get that to stay on better. So what we're going to do now is we're going to head to a place I can sit down at a table or maybe back at the house either later tonight or tomorrow. I'm going to do some more shooting around here and then a couple other places on the way back into Anchorage. What we're going to do is we're going to go over the autofocus, the hit rate, and the IQ of this lens. But we need to look at the images that are coming off of this lens because what we want to know is how does the autofocus oyster catcher over here yelling? I'm going to have to find him in a minute. Watching him. All right, there he is, which that means I know now where the nest is so I can keep an eye on that spot to see when they have their babies. It should be on a nest right now with the eggs, so hopefully here in about a couple weeks we'll have some baby oyster catchers. So now I kind of got an idea where the nest may be. Just got lucky and heard him and saw him land. But anyway, what we want to know on this lens is what is the color rendition of the elements and the fluorides and things like that are on the lens itself and the lens elements. How well do the motors autofocus? Does the lens itself, because it will affect how the autofocus system works, how it determines what it sees. I've seen this with other lenses too. Does that affect it? And we want to know when the lens says, or the camera body says, this is I'm locked on the eye. Does it actually lock onto the eye? Because what can happen is, even though the electronics are sending from the camera body to the motors saying, here's where you need to focus, how do the motors interpret that, and do they stay on it, or do they drift? We've seen with some other manufacturers and some other lenses, Kenai 7 is a big one, where its latency as far as the readout speed, which this Z9 does not have, so we eliminate that, causes that to drift a little bit during the shot. So we want to see if the motors on this, because we know the body won't cause that focus drift, but the lens could be causing focus drift. We'll see if that exists. It may not exist, or it may exist. We'll see. Being a third party, I'd expect to see some drift in there, because they don't have the full understanding that Nikon has for their own lenses for their bodies. So we'll see what happens. So let's head out of here, and we'll get back and we'll start looking at the autofocus and the image quality and the hit rate. And we'll give you our synopsis of what we think this lens looks like, and if it's worth the saving some money to buy this lens over some native Nikon lenses. So see you at the house or somewhere else. Now that we're back in the house, what we can do is we can review the EVF footage and the images that came off the camera and off this lens. So what we want to see is what the autofocus looks like in the camera, how quick is it locking on, what's the hit rate, which means basically is it actually getting critical focus, and then look at the image quality for the color rendition and those type of things, and draw a conclusion about this lens, what I think about it. But before we do that, if you guys are liking the content of the channel, and actually go watch the last video with the muskox, one of my favorite videos I've done, and you're enjoying all that stuff, please like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel monetarily, think about becoming a member or going to the shop and buying a printer, things like that. Anyway, so let's get into this real quick. So let's look at the EVF footage first to look at how the autofocus was working with this lens with the Z9. All right, so let's look at this EVF footage, some birds in flight real quick. Actually, let me slow this down to half speed. That way it'd be a little easier to see, because, you know, this happens really fast. It feels like it's longer to us when we're actually shooting, but in the real world, it looks real jittery. So we're gonna move this half speed and look at it, see how it locks on. All right, here is a black-legged kittiwake coming across here. One of my favorite little seagulls. Locking up really good. Let's run that back and look at it real quick. So it's interesting there. So it locked up pretty good. This bird's out there. I don't expect images like this distance to have any detail, because this time of year you're getting a lot of heat happening here in Alaska. So you get, especially over the ocean, you get a lot of atmospheric when you get very far away from you. So out that far, the there's going to be too much atmospheric distortion to really make that bird be crisp or clear. So this is more just to see how the tracking is going as part of getting a good image. So let's look at this some more. So it's tracking pretty good. There it went and jumped off for some reason, one frame. But tracking fairly well. I've not really seen any issue. It's trying, because I'm holding it down the whole time. It's doing a pretty good job of tracking that bird. All right, so this is going to be a least sandpiper that I had, which was the little montage video I had right before this, which was really fun shooting this least sandpiper, several of them there. But when they would kind of want to search or they'd hear something alert, they would kind of stand up really tall. Really fun. That was in that video prior to this. But let's watch how the focus gets. Now this, since I'm laying down on the ground, the focuses always have a problem kind of finding where it is in that plane. And sometimes you have to point focus an area close to where the bird may be, and then the focus will find it. That happens on all lenses. So again, if you can get your focus plane closer to where the bird is, then it gives your autofocus a more chance to success. This lens had to do that a lot more than I would on my native Nikon lenses. I did notice that, and here's an example of that. So it's not finding the bird. What I'm doing back in here is I'm trying to find that bird. I can see it blurred out here. See at the bottom right here, down here by the 6.7, that's the bird. So it sees that it should find the bird, but it wasn't. So I had the single point to get it closer where that bird was. And I think I do twice. So there's where I hit the focal plane, which went past the bird, and then it grabs the bird. So you'll have to do that a lot when you have that. I have another example of that here too. But after it got the bird, even though I'm bouncing around there, it stayed on that bird really, really well. So when we get to look at the images, we'll see if did that actually hit critical focus. All right. So this once again is where it doesn't pick up the bird real quick because everything's so far out of focus. The bird is right here behind the histogram, that little blur right there. So what you're going to see is me hit the single point to get it close to the bird or hit the bird, and then hit the autofocus to grab the bird. So learn that technique. It's going to help you a lot with these lenses. Let's look at it. So there it was. So it was out of focus. It wasn't picking up here. And then I single pointed the bird, and then I single point and hit that autofocus, boom, boom, like that. So here's a single point hitting, back it up and start over. So here we are, I'm going to single point to the bird, right there, as it starts coming in, and then I switch over to the autofocus, boom. And she's locked on. It looks good. For me, the autofocus in stills worked fairly well. It struggled a little bit more than the native Nikon lenses, but it still was very, very good. Locked on really good, locked on really fast. So I want to look at one more thing here. So this is video, and what you'll see here is the autofocus is locking okay. It did struggle a little bit when I was down really low. It would kind of lose focus sometimes when it moved towards or from me a little bit, or it would get lost in the ground or the background a few times. So, but overall, it was very acceptable autofocus in the video. This is fun watching this guy eat these little worms and bugs he was eating out there. It was pretty fun. But as you can see, it stayed on the eye pretty good. Every once in a while, I have to tap the autofocus to make sure it gets back to critical, back to that eye. But for the most part, the autofocus tracked pretty well in video. So for video, I find it really acceptable. As far as stabilization in video, the VR was okay. It's not Nikon level. I did notice it move a little more than when Nikon, it just seems to really lock in. Those lenses plus the body, phenomenal. This one worked really good, but it's not near as good as the Nikon native lenses as far as this image stabilization in video. So now let's look at the images, and we're going to start with looking at some of these bird in flight real quick. Not great pictures, just seeing did we lock on, did we get focus. And let's look at it, and it looks pretty much in focus. It's, of course, the only thing it's going to be able to hit is the back of the wing. Looks good. Go to the next image. We're staying in. Of course, it's a little dark. It's really high light, so there's too much shadow of the bird. This is not the time of day I'd be going out looking to make good images because there's too much shadows. The light's so high, so it's hitting just part of the bird and shadow the rest of the bird, especially turns. Half time the wing will be covering the head and you get it's too dark. You can see right here. But it's in focus, which is good. We're zoomed in 100% here. And then the last one of that 3-shot looks like it's still in focus, did really well. All right, let's look at this seagull. This one looks pretty good. Pretty close to critical. Same. That one's falling out. That one's out for sure. And that's back in. This one's probably the most critical out of all of them. So the first two were fairly good. Third one, the fourth one's way out. 5 jumps right back in. So there is drift in that one. Now again, birds in flight, you're going to see more drift than elsewise. All right, let's look at this fun crow. This is a really cool one in this log. Again, a crow is a common bird, but if you can find a common bird in a nice situation, it makes really good pictures. And if they do something, even better. So we're going to look at his head mostly. This one looks okay. That one does not. Critical focus is not there on that one. We're back pretty close to in critical. Same. Good. So this one's not in critical focus. Looks like it's back a little behind on the back side of the head of the bird, not in the front. Closer. That one's pretty good. That one's a little off. That one's way off. Wait, this is motion blur in this one for some reason. I can see because I see drag in the image. Then it's back in. Looks good. That one's out. The focus is back here. The bird's head's away. It didn't pick up. Then it grabs right back in the next frame. Good here. Good. Good. Back out. And then we are back in. Close. Close still. Out. Way out. Almost back in. Almost back in. Pretty much back in. And now we got our head turning away, so it's not a depth thing and it's in focus. So before we had his head turning away, the shoulder was in and the body was in focus, but the head was not. This one got the head really well. Still in focus on the way out and still there. So for the most part, it was there. But what you can see is you'll see a drift of that focus plane going in and out in this burst, because this is 20 frames a second. So I'm rattling that thing off, you know, probably about a little 1 second burst there. And you get a little, even though that bird's not moving, he may move his head a little bit left to right, but he's not moving. He's just standing right there, and you see that drift. So there's a little bit of drift here. So now let's move over to, I went and shot some tree swallows. So let's look at this little guy. Beautiful tree swallow. We are critical focus, dead on that bird. Here's how far it was away. So did really well. Great focus. Next frame, same, in focus, still there, still there, still there. So every one of those was in focus, critical focus, really good. Let's move on to the next batch. So the very first frame, we are out. Nothing's in focus. Let's go to the next one, getting closer in focus. Third one is in focus. So it took for a second for, even though it said it focused, because I don't hit the shutter button until I got a lock. So the first couple was trying to get focused and it didn't. We're in focus, head's turned away, still in focus, back of the head. And we're out of focus on that frame. Close to back in focus, and we're in focus. Stayed in focus. So that one was out. There's one in it's in, out, and then back in. Very interesting. These are all in. They look good. So those all look good. So this one here is pretty nice. Just shooting down a log here to get a little blur. And first frame out, second frame out, third frame out, fourth frame almost in, fifth frame in. Really interesting. All right. So here's the bird on the box. There's the hole there. There's babies in the nest. Let's look at the head. Looks really good. Good, good, good. I'll let you know if it goes out. That one's out. Back in. So we went out, in, in, out, in, really in. So this is really good on the focus because you got the box and everything. So it's getting the board. I mean, this is only about that far. So you got out of focus here and getting the bird in focus. Look at the feet, tail. It's nice when the bird is just parallel to you, but that is really good quality here. So let's keep going. We're in, we're in, we're in. And the lens doing good. There's one right there, a little softer. That one was soft. So yeah, those are really, really good there. Now I got one more burst I'm going to look at. It is in flight. All right, let's look at these. Here's the bird. He's coming towards the box, so I can kind of hit him as he's flying in. He's trying to stop. I don't expect, because the way the wings are and the head's just a little behind, I can see the head getting missed. But what I want to do is be able to just lock the bird in general. And so the only thing you can do here is to increase your aperture. I'm already at 6.7, but I moved to like f8, f11, and may have got more of the head in focus in some of these shots. But this is in focus. This looks really good in the back of this bird. Here, again, these wings and everything's in focus. The head's out because it's hitting the body, not hitting the head in the autofocus. I remember this one when I shot it. Next one, we're a lot closer. I'm shooting at 32 hundredths of a second, probably get a bit at 5,000. There's still a little bit of motion blur here. Fast little birds. Getting them in flight is a pain in the butt. All right, here we have got the head pretty much in focus. The whole bird's fairly in focus. His head got a little closer to the wing. Here we are, we're in focus all the way around. We're pretty close to critical. Again, shadows, high sun makes it hard because everything under here on the head where the eye would be is, in shadow. Again, we're in focus really well here. This one here, in focus, got motion blur. Little motion blur here, but pretty much looks like we got focus. This one's in focus. Again, little motion blur on the tip. Here, yes, we're a little more on the wingtip than the head. But again, I don't expect it really to lock up the head as easy as this small bird. I mean, that's what we're looking at. That's it. So 2 more. Here, the focus fairly stayed on the bird. Looks like it went more to the box though. And then the last one, it got the bird fairly well. So it did pretty good. So that last little burst there of in-flight shots was really good. All right, so what do I think for critical focus? So for critical focus and the hit rate, it sometimes was 90% or more. There was times we did see where we got 20% or 30%. So it does vary. It is less performing than my Nikon native lenses, the 1-600, the 1-400, even the 2-500. But it still is very acceptable. But you do see that we do have some drift in there. Now, as far as image quality goes, I think the detail is really good with this lens. I think the sharpness is very good with this lens. The colors that are coming out of this camera are, let's look back at this bird here. They're good. They're really good. I wish I had something that had more oranges in it than that. Actually I do, but the blues and the greens look really good. They are a little flatter, which is not bad, than the Nikon lenses, but it looks really good. All right, let's look at a bird here that has more orange, or a scene that has more oranges and yellows in it than the other one had like more blues and greens. This little scene here was a little muddy marsh here with some real good oranges and browns and greens and yellows from the plants that are in here. And the least sandpiper has a little orange in its feathers. And this little worm was a kind of a brown color. What I'm noticing here is these colors are more, again, a little bit flatter than the Nikon lenses for whatever its coatings and stuff here and the elements on this lens. cause it to be a little flatter in the image. Not a big deal. You can go into, when you're going to edit, you can apply a color profile to adjust that to get closer if you have Nikon lenses and this. Again, color profiles are a personal preference. Depends on what you prefer with your looks. So some people may want a flatter profile or may want the Instagram really rich and dark colors and stuff. I like rich colors, but I don't like going overboard. I like a little more muted, more, you know, the colors to blend a little bit more, not be so crazy poppy, at least for my Alaska photography. If I did something like the rainforest, I'd probably want more poppier colors and stuff. But what I do notice is here is this bird from, I take a lot of Lee Sandpiper pictures up here, and in all these pictures I had, the colors were a little flatter, and then of course all this mud and stuff is a little flatter. So I went and edited these pictures. That's where I would fix those colors. So like in here, I went and fixed the colors, which this is more what my Nikon lenses look like, where you see this is a little more gold in the feathers, and then of course the dirt with the brown. I need to level this picture. It's not level, it drives me nuts. But yeah, other than that, I just basically touched the warmth just a touch in this, and to get this color back in the bird. It went down to the color profile and added a little touch of orange and yellow in it. Just a touch to get it there. So it's really nice, but did really well. Again, the quality, this is extremely sharp and detailed. I mean, look at all this here, and the parts that were in focus here, really nice. All right, let's talk about the conclusion of this lens. So we talked about the handling already in the first part of this video with with the lens collar, the weight, the telescoping, the lens hood, all those things, the locking collar, all that. One thing I forgot to mention in the beginning was this guy does not take teleconverters from Nikon. It won't fit it, won't work on it. So what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to wait for Tamron, just like the F-mount lenses, you have to wait for Tamron to bring out their own teleconverters to work with this lens. So right now, no teleconverters with it. As far as the autofocus worked fairly well. It did at times when you get really close to the water or a bird got farther away or your contrast got off. The autofocus did hunt a little bit more than native lenses do with the Nikons. Then when you get into the hit rate, that's where we saw the hit rate was probably about, we had some were 90%, some down to 30%. We saw some where it was just really bad. Others was really good. What we saw was that autofocus and the hit rate lock of being, not as good as the native lenses, which again, as I said earlier, I'd expect that to happen where it's going to drift from time to time. There were some instances I was really surprised how bad the drift was, but other times it performed extremely well where nothing was out of focus, really good. Now the image quality was really good, very sharp lens. If you get the focus on, very, very sharp, tons of detail, not a problem there. Anymore, all these lenses are extremely sharp, and this one was no exception whatsoever. As far as the color profile, it is flatter than the Nikon native lenses. But again, color profiles, like I said earlier, are more of a personal preference. So it depends on what you feel with your preference of color profiles. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about on this lens is the price of the lens. This thing comes in at $1,200 US. And the next closest Nikon lens in the wildlife photography thing, the Z mount, is the 180 to 600, which comes in at $1,700. So you have a $500 difference. So what you have to do is weigh yourself out with, is that $500 difference worth the difference in the native Nikon lens versus a third-party Tamron lens? I may make a video that compares the two and looks at the two, but for right now, it's not on my radar. The second, if you want to see it, leave me comments, tell me you want to see a comparison of the two lenses. But that's this lens right here. Very good lens, has some trade-offs, has some quirks to it, but what lens doesn't? So, as always, guys, until the next video, get outside, go run that shutter.